Welcome everybody to the Animal Crossing New Horizons Year 7 thumbnail art time-lapse slash artist commentary, I suppose. So if you don't know, this is something I do for specifically the Animal Crossing thumbnail arts every year, except for kind of not last year, because last year I've had a placeholder thumbnail art for the entire time, and well, this is the thumbnail art you're about to see, is the one that was initially planned to be the one which would have been uploaded last year, but I'll be perfectly honest, it just got extremely delayed, and eventually got delayed enough where I was like, I might as well push it to next year instead, because this is honestly, I think it's a very nice thumbnail art, and it seems like a bit of a waste to sort of let it go and not have it be uploaded, you know, live for an entire year. And in most other cases, normally you'd be watching the time lapse at this moment, but this one is actually quite a big thumbnail art, and as you can probably see on the screen already, there's things to sort of talk about, you know, before we actually get into the thumbnail art, which is, you know, kind of wild to say. I will say I do apologise for the fact that the thumbnail art is delayed. It wasn't my intention. Basically, it's a kind of a mixture of I burned myself out on doing the art. Like I left it a little bit too late to do the actual like tedious parts of it, and then I just had an extremely busy start of the year last year. So I am at least glad that it's got to see the light of day now, and there will be later another one which will be retroactive for this previous year. But as you can hopefully see from the concept art in front of you, the concept for this thumbnail art was basically fashion, high fashion, from I think probably from 2 years ago onwards. Basically the concept I'm doing is I'll take one of the Animal Crossing NPCs, and then they will serve as the basis for whatever the concept of a thumbnail art is. At least that's the idea going forward. So, you know, 2 years ago we had Orville and Wilbur, who had like an aviation theme. This time we have the Able sisters, who are of course very fashion focused. And thus we have a high fashion sort of theme. I say high fashion, like it's there's kind of like a spectrum here of exactly like the fashion and clothes which are on display here. Like some of them is actually something you might conceivably wear, to all the way to something which is a lot more avant-garde, or something that you might see like a pop artist wear on the stage, for example. But the general idea is it's meant to showcase like a whole wide variety of fashion, because I am someone personally who does really like fashion, so it's something which I genuinely was quite excited to do. So this thumbnail art commentary is probably going to be like a very long one, because we're going to do this like pre-talk, and then we're going to do the actual thumbnail time-lapse as well. So if you want to skip to a thumbnail time-lapse, by all means do so. But the general ideas for this is obviously we want to cover a lot of different fashion and themes, and I'll show how it ties into Fawnhollow a little bit later. But there were some like different things that I wanted to cover. One being that because it's fashion, now I need to sort of consider a different level of anthropomorphization, essentially, of the villagers. Because fashion is generally not created for, well, it's kind of created for Animal Crossing villagers, but there's only so much you can really do with the Animal Crossing villager body type, because they can only wear very simple clothes, to be honest. And obviously all my experience of fashion is more so with human fashion, right? So it works perfectly well with Dee, because Dee, being this deer character, she is someone who is very anthropomorphized in the first place, but the Animal Crossing villagers are only like somewhat, they have a very sort of cutesy, simplified body type, right? So there was like a decision basically here, which, as you can see from the concept art, I basically anthropomorphized them more. Like I pushed them further on the scale of being more anthropomorphized, so they had more of like a human-shaped body basically to work with, so then human-shaped fashion would work with them. Perhaps I'm not quite at a level to be able to design too many intricate things for Animal Crossing villagers, but there was also another reason, is that one thing I wanted to do for this thumbnail art is I wanted to basically have all the villagers on much more equal footing. As you can see from a lot of the previous thumbnail arts, they're basically all framed as Dee is there, like very much in the foreground, taking up about half of thumbnail art, and then everyone else is very small in the background. This leads to a pretty big disconnect, I think, between Dee and the other villagers. Which is not something I wanted for this concept. In this one, I wanted everyone basically to be like a group, like photo shoot, essentially. But yeah, because Dee is also so separated from the other villagers, I think it's less weird that Dee is much more anthropomorphized than the other villagers are. So the other villagers have very simple, not quite to the Animal Crossing level proportions, but somewhere along those lines. But since everyone needs to be on the same level of proportion, I thought it would look very, very weird if Dee was basically standing there on equal ground and footing with everyone, and then she was just like a completely different style from everyone. So everyone got a bit more anthropomorphized for several different reasons. But yes, the general concept is this was meant to be like a high-end fashion shoot, you know, something, you wouldn't, I guess maybe you would see like a double cover spread in a magazine, as like a sort of like opening thing, being like, this is all the fashion that you'll see later on in this magazine. And one thing I definitely wanted to do is cover basically a wide variety of different fashion styles and aesthetics and colours and things, basically, while also trying to tie it into Fawnhollow and the theme of the villages that we have. So that's why we have a lot of different sort of styles going on, and I'll break them all down in a moment. But just to give you sort of like an overall summary, is that Fawnhollow is theoretical lore behind everything, is a sort of like pantheon of deities where all the villages represent something in this theoretical kind of, think of like fantasy deities. So there's like 4 different subgroups we have here of the like sort of fashion trends we kind of have. So we have like, I don't know, more like fundamental fate based deities featuring Dee, Phoebe and Fauna. We have the seasonal ones featuring Apollo, Rowan, Biscuit and Raymond. Sorry, I don't have like a proper script here. I've only got bullet point talking points, so a lot of what I'm saying might not be so fluent. And then we have elements, so fire, earth, water, air, which we have Amelia, Vivian, Audie and Lily. And then finally we have the guest NPCs, of course being the 3 Able sisters, Label, Mabel and Sable. So yeah, the general idea is that I wanted every character to have a unique fashion aesthetic, you know, something you can point at and be like, I can see exactly what the concept is going for, and then also something which ties into essentially what their clothing outfit is. So I've already spoken for 5 minutes, let's basically dive into and I can sort of explain more about exactly what each of these different fashion outfits are. So I think we'll start with the Able sisters, because I think they're probably one of the easiest ones to sort of explain. But conceptually, I think these are the ones which are much closest to sort of like high street fashion, something that you would conceivably wear on maybe like a day-to-day basis, or something like that. Like it's not reserved for like the runway or for like the Met Gala. So with the general idea I wanted them to obviously have 3 different styles to show off their 3 different personalities, but also some things which basically linked the 3 characters all together. You can also notice here that I sort of diversified their body types and their hair a little bit, because I mean, in game they basically look pretty identical shape-wise, you know, fair enough, it's a game. But I felt like with the art, like we can make it a little bit different. So you see that Mabel is a bit sort of like shorter, and while Sable is like much taller and thinner. But you can also see like their hairstyles are a little bit different as well. You know, maybe Mabel's got like this sort of curlier hair, while Sable's got a lot more sort of like flat hair. And you can see that they each have, you know, different fringes and things to sort of differentiate them. But yes, I also wanted something which linked all of them, and I think the only obvious choice is obviously to use the Gingham, I don't know how you say that word, pattern, which is the pattern that Mabel and Sable use for their aprons. That sort of like square pattern. I think technically what I did actually in the final art is not actually Gingham. So, but it's that general sort of like checkerboard pattern which tries to link them together. And in the final one, which you don't see in the concept art, so I also use the sort of triangle motif for the 3 of them, where, you know, Sable's a down arrow, Mabel's up arrow, and then Label is kind of like both, and then also there's like the sort of like red, yellow, green colour scheme, or red, orange, green, you know, traffic-like sort of colours. But starting with Label, she's obviously got very sort of business... I put business casual here. It's not quite sort of business casual. It's more like, it's meant to be very sort of smart, very classy, you know, she's kind of like very girl boss, right? So of course she's got a blazer, she's got like a very simple dress underneath, and of course she has like a very signature ascot like tie. It's not a tie, I guess, but ascot necklace, neckerchief which she wears, which I wanted to preserve because I'm like, that's very iconic for her. So she's meant to be very sort of business fashion, essentially office fashion, with exactly what she's wearing. Mabel, on the other hand, is meant to be a lot more sort of like relaxed and more casual. She's got like a lot of country-based influences. You can even see that in the concept. I put like these apple-based earrings in her hair. I forget what it's actually called, this type of sort of shirt, but it's like this very sort of country like sleeveless shirt as well, and then she's like very casually wearing like a jacket off shoulders. Sable, on the other hand, is meant to be something which draws from like grunge and punk aesthetics. Something that maybe you see like an 80s rocker sort of wearing. You know, she's got like asymmetric like triple piercings. She's got like a very sort of dramatic fringe. These sort of like checkerboard pants, which I feel like I see a lot in like sort of punk-esque sort of aesthetics. And you see the concept has like the sort of draped coat over her shoulders, which is meant to, you know, be a bit more rebellious, even though, to be honest, Sable's not obviously that rebellious in game, but I thought it was something that would like really fit her aesthetic. So you can see that these are the 3 ideas for the Able Sisters, and initially what I was going for. And then we sort of move up the scale of something which is a bit more conceptual, I suppose, moving from like high street fashion to more like specific occasions or something, or not maybe runway, but maybe something which is maybe you wouldn't quite usually wear, but it's still conceivable to wear, I think, from day to day. And that would be the seasonal outfits, which are Biscuit, Rowan, Raymond and Apollo, representing spring, summer, autumn and winter, respectively. So I wanted each of our outfits to be very much evocative of something that, one, you would wear during that season, but also show off the season and the weather as well, within like the patterns. Yes, if we start with sort of Biscuit, you can see that he's basically got like this very, very cute outfit on. It's sort of like a softy, or like pastel themed aesthetic. You can't really see the colours here, and he's basically kind of looking like a gardener, because what do we associate with spring? Flowers, all that sort of thing. You can see the sleeves as well have a sort of like very flowery like pattern, with how they sort of like spread out to be like a opening flower. His overalls as well have like these vines sort of crawling around them. Again, very sort of garden aesthetic. You can see that he's got like 2 ribbons on him, which look like little sprouts coming off. And then the shoes he's wearing basically are like galoshes, you know, something that you'd wear in a garden. But obviously Biscuit is very cute, so obviously we're trying to make it very sort of cutesy sort of thing. His sleeves are like oversized and that sort of thing, and it's very sort of a very sweet aesthetic, isn't it? So that's like the general idea of what Biscuit is. Rowan, on the other hand, representing summer, is meant to be something that you would basically see someone wear at like a party or a club, a festival, you know, a rave or something like that. And I think things which are very typical of that, you know, fishnet sort of patterns of fishnet texture material. I'm not really sure how you describe it. You can also see that he has this sort of like body harness kind of thing, which you kind of see in like a variety of different sort of fashion things. I think, you know, you also see, you know, quite a lot in like K-pop fashion, I'll be perfectly honest. But you would also see a lot of like club wear, because I very much imagine like him going to like a summer festival, like a Coachella or something, and wearing this sort of thing. So he's got the sunglasses as well, you know, he's got like fun piercings, and he's got like these sort of like band accessories as well. Wristband accessories. You can also see in the concept art that initially I gave him like uneven trousers and shorts, and that's mainly because of like asymmetry is like a really big thing in like, well, it's not so much a thing in what people usually wear, it's kind of often incorporated into designs of things because it's fun, essentially. It gives a bit of sort of like a, rather than having things look perfectly symmetrical, which can feel a bit flat, sometimes you give a bit of asymmetry to make it look more like exciting, quote, quote. That didn't end up sticking because I was like, this looks weird. But that's basically the general idea. Someone that you would see at a party, and you know, like a summer party or festival, and would sort of like, well, celebrate with you. Raymond, representing autumn, has a much more sort of like indie or hipster aesthetic is probably what I describe it as, which is a bit, you know, difficult to pin down because I think the definition of indie and hipster kind of depends on what is actually, you know, the most popular culture at the time. Indie and hipster generally trying to be something which sort of goes against it. But I guess if I were to like not use those labels, I would use something like very sort of like, I'm not sure, like a casual formal. Like, that doesn't make any sense, but maybe like academic, maybe is kind of like the sort of general direction, but not quite academia, that sort of aesthetic. But he's got like the turtleneck, he's got like the very like neat slacks, and then basically the focal point is basically his very interesting coat, which has like autumn leaves falling down, which is a bit, you know, showy in some regards, but I also think it's kind of interesting. You also might see there that he's got a very interesting like way of wearing the coat, which I was like, I don't know, this is just feels like something you might see on a runway, where he's basically half wearing his coat. He's half wearing it and then the other half it's not on. It's just like fastened by a belt. Does this really make sense? No, but is it kind of interesting? Yeah, you know. As it goes with high fashion, a lot of high fashion is experimentation. Or depending, I suppose, on quite how high into the avant-garde aesthetics or types of designs you go. So I think it would be a lot of fun basically to experiment with things. And also I wanted to make it at least kind of interesting. Otherwise he's basically just wearing like a trench coat over a turtleneck, which is, you know, it's fine, but you know, it's like, why not push it a little bit more if we're trying to get very fashiony in here. So yeah, he kind of looks like, to me, like someone who would be an artist or someone who'd be like a writer or something you would find like in a cafe or something, like typing up on their laptop in the corner and drinking some coffee. Like that's the sort of general idea that I had while sort of trying to draw that. Apollo, representing winter, is meant to be very sort of formal, very sort of like gentleman, you know, very classy sort of aesthetic. Because I'm going to be honest, he's basically just wearing a suit and tie. The only thing which is notably wintry, I think, is kind of like the coat which goes over the top. I did sort of play around with the idea of making like the suit itself kind of wintry, but in my opinion, it looked kind of weird. I didn't really know how to make it work, so I was just like, okay. It also, like, would you just wear a suit and tie in winter? Probably not. But you would wear probably a suit and tie and like a top coat as well. So you see that he has like these sort of snowy effects which come down his coat, and he's got like a big fluffy collar which doesn't actually end up in the final design to sort of represent this like snowy thing. But the general idea is that he's meant to look like he's basically like a very formal, classy businessman or something out in winter. That's what he's wearing. So you can kind of see that like these four, they're kind of meant to be along the sort of general aesthetics of like, yeah, you could conceivably see someone wearing this, maybe not necessarily from day to day, but like at these certain events, it kind of makes sense. Then we sort of like move up the scale, like once more, I think, to the elements, which is Lily, Vivian, Audie and Amelia, who are representing water, earth, fire and air, respectively. These are a lot more experimental, and I would probably put them all sort of like in performance-based outfits, where it's very much like these are for like display, like maybe for like a fancy event, or you know, in some cases like performing on stage, or something for that you'd see for a runway. I don't like the lines are kind of blurred between this category and the next category, to be honest, but so be it. But yeah, they're all meant to, each one of them is meant to like sort of evoke the general idea of one of the fundamental quote elements, or whatever they're called. So yes, I guess I'll start with Lily, who is, I forget what this aesthetic is technically called. I think it's called like ethereal aesthetic, but it's not quite right. But she's got obviously like a very, very flowy, very dramatic dress on. Obviously meant to sort of like mimic flowing water. It's meant to be like the dress is like rolling down her as if it's water itself. She has like this sort of like very interesting, I would say, neckline, where it's basically like a wave which is meant to sort of like come crashing around, and then we have like this flowery piece meant to be like the foam of a wave as well. The sleeves itself, of course, long and flowy as well. So everything is just meant to be super long, super flowy, almost like a ball gown that you would see someone wear like a very fancy, you know, maybe even at a Met Gala, I don't know. Or probably more likely like a very classy, like high-end evening soiree or something. But you can see that even like there are like multiple different layers of waves of a dress as well, which are meant to sort of like simulate the waves, and then you see that everything sort of just like very much naturally sort of flows down. Then we move on to Vivian, who's representing Earth, and Earth is, you know, quite a wide variety of things. It could be anything sort of natural, you know, flowers and trees, but I was like, that kind of really already taps into spring, which Biscuit's kind of already representing. So I'm like, okay, let's try and take it the other direction of like earth and rocks. And I was like, how do you make rocks into an outfit, or a very showy, like high fashion outfit? Jewels, right? I mean, jewels, gemstones, they come from the earth, right? So she's kind of tapping into sort of like a retro glam aesthetic. Like you can see like a glam pop star or something, which is very showy, and I think striking is perhaps the word I would use. You can see that asymmetry is very much in fashion here, where she's kind of got like this, I'm not sure what you call it, like a bodice sort of piece, which is like these crystals underneath, and then she has like these shards coming out, which are meant to look like quartz-like shapes, coming out on her other side. She has like this sheer sort of backdrop, which goes down one leg, and which goes all the way up to her neck, which is kind of meant to be like dark, you know, earth, like a cave or something. And then to sort of like fit this sort of like glam rock aesthetic, she has like this like big long fringe, like very curly as well. And in the final outfit itself, it's even like sort of dyed as well. This like I think is also kind of inspired by like of sort of pop starry sort of aesthetics that we have now, like not to extreme degree, but you know, things like KDA, you know, I think it also sort of like tapped into, because people like to use these very like crystalline effects. But it's very much someone you can see on stage, like being like dancing along or something during like a musical concert or performance, and that's kind of the idea of what she's got going on. Audie is representing fire, and she, I think, very clearly sort of like tries to tap into sort of like a street aesthetic or punk aesthetic. She's got like this big like long bangs, dyed hair, like many sort of different piercings. She's like wearing her shoulder sort of like wearing her coat like off shoulder in a very casual way, and you can see that the coat she's wearing is basically like singed and burned at the end, and even like the third part of her coat is meant to sort of come out like flames. Everything is meant to have like this sort of like intensity to it. And you can see in the front, which you don't actually see in the thumbnail art, like basically at all, she has like this sort of like crisscrossy sort of shape going down. Her dress as well, which is meant to also kind of be like the flame shape. But yeah, you'll later see that basically does not translate at all, because you can't see it in the pose that she has. But yeah, she's meant to be like very sort of like in your face, punchy, boom. You know, like maybe even like a biker sort of aesthetic, I would almost say. Not really. Please don't ride a bike wearing this. But yes, so that's Audie, and Amelia, the final one of the seasonal outfits. She's representing wind, and I think hers is probably the closest to like avant-garde, sort of like Met Gala-like fashion. You can see it's very sort of big, like sort of showy in a way. Like I think you could conceivably see someone wearing this at the Met Gala, and it's sort of like towing the lines of like what feels like a reasonable outfit or not, because you can basically see it's not really a dress, it's basically kind of like a ribbon like wrapped around it with like sheer fabric in between, sort of like securing it all together, which is kind of nonsensical, I'm going to be honest, for an outfit. It doesn't really make sense, but the general idea is that she's meant to kind of look like a tornado, you know. She's even got like this big like swooshy like feather fringe thing. She's got a feather boa which sort of wraps around her as well to really sort of sell that high, elegant, classy, you know, aesthetic. So yeah, those are the 4 elements, and we're almost done. The final 3, being Dee, Phoebe, and Fauna, are more like the fundamental, I suppose, ideas, where Phoebe represents death, Fauna represents life, and then Dee herself represents fate. So these ones I would say are like, I don't know, it kind of depends. Like Dee's one feels to me very sort of like no one would wear this even conceivably, just like normally. This is a stage outfit really. And Fauna's and Phoebe's like maybe depending on your aesthetic, I think they're like a little bit showy, to be honest, but maybe that's your vibe, I don't know. So that's why I say the line's a bit blurred, exactly with how far down the sort of everyday sort of outfit to the high-end sort of outfit you would wear. But let's start with Fauna. Fauna has like a historical sort of aesthetic going on. Historical-ish, it's obviously not very accurate, but to like an actual Victorian era dress, but like it takes things from it. It's meant to be, you know, reasonably formal, something that you would see like an, you know, maybe like a very rich aristocrat or something having like a dinner party for. And the general vibe is it's meant to sort of give like an angel sort of aesthetic. So the fascinator hat she's wearing is meant to look kind of like a halo. This big sort of cape she's got coming out her back is meant to be evocative of like angel wings. She almost looks like a doll, I suppose, of how like frilly and fluffy everything ends up essentially being. while on the other hand, Phoebe is meant to obviously represent death. She's meant to have that overall sort of idea of being like a reaper. She has a very sort of alternative gothic, or goth I should say, outfit on, obviously drawing from like a bunch of different places. Like I'm not saying that these are exactly, it's only one aesthetic I drew from, but it's like a lot of different things, and some of them sort of like merge and blur. But the general idea is she's meant to look like a reaper. You know, you got like this sort of like hooded thing and like this short jacket which goes on top, like fishnets underneath. It's very much meant to be like quite standoffish in a way, or like striking is perhaps the way I'd put it. I think I did play around with the like idea that like her makeup as well was also meant to be like reflective of like a skull. I didn't end up doing it mainly because it didn't look, you only see half her face in the final thumbnail art, so it's kind of something which didn't translate very well. But yeah, it's meant to be very sort of striking, like a reaper, of course. And then finally, we're going to talk about Dee, who I would basically put her in like squarely. Her aesthetic is meant to be a stage outfit. It's meant to be like a pop star, essentially. So she's meant to be represented by fate. She's also meant to be like the sort of like the queen deity, you know, the Zeus of his pantheon. She sort of like overlooks all of them, which you'll see more in the colour choices when we actually get to her flat colours. But because she's fate and she's often got like a sort of ribbon motif going on, you can see that she has a lot of like these lace crisscross patterns, ribbons everywhere, essentially, trying to represent that, you know, red string of fate, that sort of thing. You can see later on, I sort of play with it a little bit, but the general ideas that you'll see is that she has like the sort of split pattern of black and white, you know, representing life and death in a way, and then she has like a rainbow incorporated into her more ribbony patterns to try and sort of bring and unite everyone together. Like, that's what she's meant to do. I think her one actually changes a lot from the concept to the actual execution, because when I was actually drawing it, it didn't really feel that, like, she didn't really feel like a deity, I suppose, in a way. Now, I'm not meant to say that these are meant to be reflective of a deity, but like, that's the theoretical backstory, lore of what's going on. So there you go. So that's like one of the first things I did, which is basically designed all the outfits. I don't have a time-lapse recording of it because I was being very experimental with it and I didn't really want to record that. But now that we had these outfits, the next thing that had to be figured out was basically the posing or the rough blocking, which you can see here. So this is known as sort of like blocking or thumbnailing, where initially this drawing was considerably smaller, where you basically draw out like a very small scale without committing to a big drawing of exactly kind of what you want. And in my case, I wanted to basically figure out where the heck is everyone going to go, because there are, I believe, 14 different people in here, and that is so many people, like, to try and fit in one thumbnail art. The ways I've done it in previous ones is that like other villages have just basically been really small in the background, but as I said near the beginning, is that I wanted everyone to have quite equal footing, I suppose. So that's the general idea of what I wanted to do, and it was a real challenge. Obviously there's only some certain rules, like D has to be somewhat the main focus, central in one way or another. So here she is in the center, and then I wanted some sort of balanced symmetrical effect, but you can even see that it's very difficult to fit everyone in. So almost everyone, or is kind of like in some way, like very few people are standing up, essentially. Most people in some way are sort of like either like sitting down or like hunched over in one way. I mean, Biscuit and Audie are straight up lying across the top because there's just no more room to put anyone else in. Yes. So it's a very difficult thing, and everyone needs to read somewhat clearly, so there can't be too much overlap. Overlap is inevitable, but the silhouettes also need to be somewhat kind of clear. So you can see that this is a thumbnail art which is going to get very messy very quickly. You can also see that at the back, Gracie Grace is there as well. She's kind of, or they're kind of, one of, if you don't know, they're like the fashion designer in Animal Crossing, but they're not present at all, I think, in New Horizons, maybe as an amiibo, I don't know. So originally they were going to be in the background, not as a character, but like as a design, to basically be like, oh, this is like Gracie Grace's like line of fashion or something. This is like representing the Gracie Grace photo shoot. I ended up cutting Gracie Grace, I'm sorry to say, because that's exactly where either the title or the numbers needed to go, so I was just like, I'm not going to do something which is you're not even going to see in any of the thumbnail arts. But yes, the general vibe is you can't really see here, but the general vibe is that we wanted something quite modern. So imagine sort of like dark rooms, strong lights, you know, lit up podiums and everything. Everyone, you know, doing like an absolute slay of a pose. That's the general idea. So now you have the concepts. You'll see the time lapse, or you've already seen the time lapse if that's what you skipped ahead to, where we have the different sort of stages where now we've got the thumbnail and the blocking, and we've got the concept art, we do the sketch, we do the flats, and then we do the final render. So let's get started. So here we are with the actual thumbnail art time lapse itself. This is 15 minutes, so buckle up, as right now I'm doing a rough sketch of exactly what I want to do, and obviously I'm starting with Dee. She's the most important in this thumbnail art, and you can see I experiment with a lot of different accessories. She even had glasses for a moment, but I think the Able sisters were relatively solid. You see Mabel has that sort of arm up pose because I really wanted to give that to someone, but it didn't make sense for Dee because she ended up blocking a lot of things. And I'm basically going in with all the shapes and trying to figure out more accurately where everyone's going to go, how everyone fits in, what are their poses, what are their expressions. This is basically just sort of feeling things out. Things can be a bit more experimental, trying to figure out how the clothes sort of like interact and with the scenery and everything together. Because this stage is pretty important to understand where everyone goes. You can see I'm very much struggling with Vivian's arms here. That pose is quite a difficult one. It's also trying to understand like how big, small everyone should be. Have I got the scalings correct? Is there enough space for everyone? Do I need to change anything? That's the general idea of what's going on here. Everyone's on a different layer. There's going to be a lot of finessing. You can even see here with Fauna as well, you know, I'm experimenting with different poses. I wanted to, I drew her looking like quite hopeful, then I wanted her looking quite forlorn. Phoebe, I wanted something like really edgy, you know, going on. Micro adjustments over here to try and get everyone in, trying to fit Biscuit and Audie in. As you can see, there's basically no space. They have to basically lie across the top as the only last space left. Which one I think is very dramatic. Everyone in here is meant to have like a very sort of dramatic fashion-esque sort of pose, you know. But you can see just how much finessing needs to go in to actually make everything work. So now we're moving on to a refined sketch. This is what I'm basically using the basis of my line art for. So it's basically very unclean line art. So rough is basically where everyone goes, and then the refined is what I actually end up needing to draw. You can see actually Dee has a lot more accessories on, and you see things still even change to the line art. As we'll get into later, this art is so insanely busy that I actually ended up simplifying a lot of the designs, kind of. So yeah, I'm just basically going through. I'm making, like, this is pretty close to what the final line art's meant to be. Like, I'm actually properly drawing all the hands rather than just sort of like rough blobby shapes, because I essentially want to go with line art and not have to think about it. I want to make sure that everything is properly locked into place and I can easily do the line art over the top. But you can see that I'm drawing both the body in this black pencil, just so I can sort of see exactly where everything should be. It's very important for Amelia and Polo here because they have a lot of their silhouettes overlapping with each other. I need to make sure that it actually makes sense how they're basically, you know, interacting, you know, how Amelia's sitting on Apollo's leg, like, does it make physical sense? And then afterwards I go with a blue sketch pencil to fill in what their outfit should be, like how the outfit should fall. I always like to do this separately because clothing, I think, is a very important part, I think, of what I want to do. So being able to make sure I have room for everything and being able to change things separately to how a body is posed, I think is quite important. And the red layer, the background there, is basically the rough sketch underneath, just so I can actually distinguish it. As you can see, then, like, all of these outfits are pretty detailed, so they end up being like quite a difficult thing to sort of understand really what's going on. Yes, so there's not really much else to say at this point. You can see even, like, there's another detail which ends up getting cut is Vivian's sort of like sparkles and shines going on. But so far it's pretty reasonable, I think. Like, I am drawing a lot, and is it all necessary? Not necessarily, because, like, it's not like you're going to see the body sketches underneath, especially when it's dressed. Like, are you going to see the legs? It just helps me understand exactly where the characters go. There you can see Grace, who doesn't make it to the end, and here you can figure out in red is the background, in green is the foreground of what I want going on. So I'm just going to pause once it comes to the sketch layer over here and talk a little bit about it, where you can see the general concept of what's going on kind of like emerge, is what I'd say. You can see that everyone is basically sort of posing on these like podiums, is maybe the best way to put it, which is the general idea of what I wanted. Is to have everyone sort of like on these little stages, because it makes sense. Otherwise, like how else? Why is this Biscuit and Audie floating in the air? What is Vivian standing on? Why is she so much higher than the others? And the general idea about these red platforms is they'd be flat on the top and they'd be sort of like crystalline stone-like structures sort of winding around with like these very sharp jagged edges, which to me gives off like a very sort of modern feel in a way. Very powerful motif. You can also see that there were just a lot of like these columns in the background as well, which weren't necessarily ones they're sitting on. So I guess they're like in a column of like in a forest of crystals, pillars, I don't know. And you can even see in the green, which is foreground, there are one of these like very long swoopy lines, which are meant to be veils, which sort of come around kind of making it feel like, oh, the veil's blowing up and you see, whoa, look at all these fashion icons underneath. And then we have these crystals hanging down as well to also give that feel. Basically, none of this makes it into the final thumbnail art, as you'll essentially see of the flats layer. This thumbnail art is too busy that I was basically like, if I put anything crazy in the background here, it's going to be unintelligible. But anyway, let's now continue on with resuming what the rest of it looks like. The rest of the thumbnail art. So you would probably have seen that I basically did like some rough shading layers as well. I'm just sort of getting a good idea of like where the values are, exactly where things, you know, what things should be bright and what things shouldn't be. Which I'm talking about instead of a line art here, because the line art phase is actually the most straightforward phase in my opinion. It's basically, you've done the sketch, make it neat. There are still some changes here and there. There's some things which I figure out, like, you know, specific details on like how do people's nails work or how do certain accessories, like what things should be emphasized, which things shouldn't, but a lot of it is basically just drawing the sketch. And picking out what parts should be displayed and what shouldn't be displayed. Here you can see in the Able Sisters that triangle motif, which wasn't originally planned but then later came in. Here you can see Dee's design. You can actually see that sort of like, what's it called? Neckline thing come out, which is a very interesting one. It's meant to be sort of like a branching path, essentially. Sort of like a, you know, like a tree of fate, I guess, where it's like the main path in the middle and then like with different possibilities all branching out, which I actually think is kind of fun. Have I ever seen any outfit like that? No, but it's a cool idea. But yeah, as the sort of line art's going on, I can talk a bit more sort of preemptively about things going on, is that you'll eventually see that the line art is extremely busy because it's so many sort of things crossing over. And a very important thing that I wanted to make sure that is at least like some sacrifices have to be made, like things can't be perfect. But one thing I needed to pay attention to is basically the silhouettes of everything. Does everyone read at least somewhat clearly? And the answer is kind of, maybe. I'm not sure if I completely nailed it. But I certainly tried my best. But that's what makes so important, like this sort of shading layer, which I don't normally do for thumbnail arts because there's not normally as many busy pieces. But if you're doing any big piece of art, I would very much recommend doing like a values sort of exploration, trying to think like where things should be in focus, like are things clearly differentiated from each other otherwise? What general shade are things going to be? Because then you can like spot things, which you'll see I struggle with much later on, with a flat colours where I'm just like, I can't see a lot of what's going on. Because it all like merges together, or like there's too much going on. Because you'll see with a flat colours layer, in a flat colour section, one major challenge I face is that there are actually just too many colours going on. There's too many things going on, and it's something I didn't consider, but I'm like, I've already done all this line art, I'm going to make it work instead of, you know, redoing it all, essentially. So yeah, this line art phase is not really much that changes, but there are some small changes where like when I'm drawing out with line art, I'm like, it doesn't really work. Like I think Phoebe's outfit I changed to be asymmetric, because I thought that's a little bit rebellious. Vivian I gave like a diamond shaped cutout in her sheer outfit because I'm like, that seems like something that would be fun. But otherwise I don't think there's anything all too crazy here. I think something which might be interesting is kind of like what level of detail of line art should you put in, because some things you can represent with basically the shading, and some things, you know, you kind of want the line art to actually show the shape of what's going on. And it's kind of like your mileage may vary. I would say frills are an absolute nightmare because I think there's something that I basically want to draw on line art every single time, but they take so long, they're so finicky to draw, they're even harder to shade, and it's an absolute nightmare, I think, drawing them. But yeah, I'm so insistent in incorporating them at all times. Anyway, so we're moving on to the flat colours here. This part is also very straightforward. We're basically just doing the body colours first, and then we'll think about the clothing colours. Because I wanted to get a bit of like an overview of what all the colours essentially look like before I started blasting on clothing colours. While I do have an idea of what clothing colours I do want, and there are certain motifs each of the villages I use, I have each of the villages palettes, which I sort of like want to tap into. It's also good to get like an overall picture. So yes, I'm just starting with the body colours. I'm basically taking it from like the flat icons you see, and then adjusting them afterwards if I'm like, this colour doesn't feel quite right. Which, I think you probably see the roads. I think I probably turned down that saturation. That looks very bright, but honestly, I can't remember. And it definitely happened with Biscuits, where I changed like the colour from his actual icon to something which more matched, I think, my perception. Because you see I have a 3D model there as well. When shading comes in, things look a little bit different. One very small detail which you'll absolutely not be able to notice from the far zoomed out thumbnail art is that each of the different eye lights in their eyes are basically different shapes depending on the elements. And now you can see the fun I have here on actually colouring everything. I'm sorry, this is probably very disorientating. There's so much I spent with D because I was like, how do I make this unified, like everything together theme work? You can see I brought in back this like ribbon sash thing, and eventually I settled on this like half black, half white sort of split thing, and then having rainbow as an accent colour, which is a crazy accent colour to have. She kind of basically looks like an RGB, like RAM stick or something. The Able Sisters I think went pretty straightforward. I think Mabel I struggled with quite a lot because the jacket didn't look as good as I wanted. Sable's I think looked quite nice at the end. But yeah, it's a lot of basically finessing. You can see how like much I zoom in and out because I'm trying to sort of compare everything together, how much things flash because I'm trying to figure out exactly what colours make most sense. Here you can see with Rowan, he's got like a sort of like sunrise sort of thing going on his top. With Raymond, you have like leaf colours on his turtleneck, and then obviously all the leaves coming down his top as well. I think I ended up taking out the green because I didn't really like what it looked like. It didn't look autumnal enough. Vivian, obviously we're leaning quite purple, but I tried to put some different accent colours of blue in, and then I was like, oh, I don't really like how it looks with the outfit, so I sort of turned it down a bit. Now Fauna's meant to be mostly quite white, I suppose, with her outfits, but like I can't just do pure white the entire time, so I used some yellow as well. Amelia's meant to be somewhere in like the bluish category. I tried experimenting with green, I didn't really like it. And then Apollo, you can actually see that Amelia's feather boa ends up merging with Apollo's collar in the end because I basically thought it looked better as that silhouette because it already looked like that, and I was like, let's not try and separate that. You see a lot of pastel colours going on with Biscuit, and then well, Phoebe's also quite a challenge because she's meant to be wearing mostly black. And then Audie as well, like, oh my gosh, like Audie's yellow colour, I can never feel like I find like a good enough yellow colour with a palette. So it always feels like a real challenge to get everything together properly. And then I think that's when I decided, let's get her like scene hair in as well, you know, get like a sort of like dyed streaks, because I think that's a lot of fun. So yeah, here you can see, I'm not sure how well you can see it, but I'm basically messing with the colours because I have a layer over the top which basically takes out all the saturation, which is why it flashes to black and white every now and then. So I can basically compare and be like, hey, does anyone look too flat? Like, does anyone have like the same brightness all across the board? How do colours need to change? So I'll just sort of pause here while we're going into the shading. As we bring up the flat layers, and you see that this background layer is actually rendered, quote quote, because I ended up picking it up afterwards. But these are the final colours I ended up settling with, and you see it's basically the biggest challenge I face is that it's an amorphous blob of all the colours. It's very, very difficult to make it feel quite unified, and I think basically impossible. You have like these sort of like groups of warm colours like in the top left and the bottom right, and then you have like this diagonal of cool colours through the middle, which feels a bit jarring. I think I definitely could have, in retrospect, thought about the colours with my placement of the villages as well. I was basically just thinking about their personalities and who I wanted to frame over front, but I didn't really think much about exactly who, like what colour schemes made the most sense to go where exactly. which ended up causing me, I would say, a decent amount of issues. But yeah, it's also very important to know your values. So you see when things sort of like flash black and white is, as I say, I basically have a layer which basically reduces all the colours down to either just the saturation levels or the values or the brightness. And then you basically want to take a look at each of the characters and be like, hey, does anyone have basically like, are they too grey? Is like everything too close together in saturation or shades? If so, change it. You need silhouettes, like you want things which you want people's eyes to be drawn to, you know, having higher saturation, things which are more like a supporting cast, bring back a lower saturation, and you can do the same with brightness and contrast as well. If everything is too much of the same brightness, everything gets like the same dominance in trying to be eye-catchiness, and by eye-catchiness it makes it very difficult to discern things. But if you have a variety of brightness, you know, your eyes are immediately drawn to one thing or another, and then just like that, you can see what you can focus on. Like, I think Vivian might be a really good example where, like, her sheer, like, clothing means, like, her legs and, like, this sort of, like, chest area sort of is very dark in the background. You don't see it as much, but you're drawn into it instead, like, the bright crystals of, like, her clothing outfits. And you're kind of drawn into, like, her eyes as well. Label is also a good one of, like, priority as well, where the black dress is not that important, so it's staying black in the background, but what is the pop of colour? The pop of colour is that orange blazer she's wearing on top, which is like the signature motif of what she's going on, because I'm like, that's what I want you to focus on. So you've got to be very careful. You can see, even if you go back and look, some of the colour changes I do, like, are basically because I look at the values and be like, oh, this doesn't look right, or oh, this is too saturated. I think it happened a lot with Biscuit, where everything was basically too pastel, everything was too bright, so that's why I ended up darkening his overalls colour a lot, and then increasing, I think, the saturation on his body, I think, to make things feel like we had a bit of, like, dynamic difference in them. Anyway, so that's the flats. Now we're going to move on to the rendering, where we're basically shading everything. And I think in model photoshoots lighting, one, the shading can be quite sort of like harsh, and two, and you'll see I end up changing this later on, is that most of the time the model's face is very much well illuminated, but, you know, model photoshoots are pretty well illuminated in first place, because I think you probably don't want these like cross shadows or like these face shadows disrupting the flow of a piece when you're doing photography. I don't know, I'm not a photographer. So I already knew from the beginning that when I was doing the shading that I wanted it to be pretty dramatic, which is why I'm doing this destructive shading, which is I start with everything shaded and then I erase the parts which are lit up. And then also I want the face to be perfectly lit up. You know, I basically cheat the system even if it doesn't make sense. And yeah, that's basically it. I think this was a bit extra to try and make Vivian's curls more apparent, like do curls on her shading, curls on her hair. I don't know if it rendered that well, but yeah, I would mostly be focusing on shading. I will be going in later with a highlight layer, but like it's not that important because I think most of the light effects should be shown through the shading. Because if it was a photo shoot, there should be pretty even shading over everyone. There's not going to be like parts which I feel like glow necessarily unless it makes sense for material. Again, I don't know if that's quite correct, but that was my assumption from looking at reference images. So yes, I'm going in with basically just a base shading layer where I'm trying to get like the big blocks out of like what is in the shadows, what is not. And then I take a break and I try and do the background here, and you can see the initial idea of the background is we'll try and make it look like a prismatic colour, very colourful background. And then I looked at it with all the characters on top and I was like, this is so distracting. So you can see I experiment with making it black and white, and that's eventually what I end up going with, because the background needs to sort of like fade away. This point is a sort of detour where I'm basically trying to sort of figure out where everyone fits together. You can see I had to flip around Audi because there's basically no space for the text to go up top without it being unreadable. At the end of the day, I'm not making like a concept art or something, I'm making a thumbnail art. So it needs to be readable as a thumbnail art, the title needs to be readable. So, but I still want Audi's face to be visible, so I flipped her around. So the text goes over her legs rather than her face. You can see I also put like a very subtle prismatic colour into the background and in the light fixtures as well. And right now basically I'm going through dark shadows and now I'm going through highlight colours. And just to talk about that a little bit is because the background was simplified a lot, and I was like, well, okay, what can I put in which is not too distracting and, you know, can be still kind of visually interesting. And I was like, let's do like spotlight lasers sort of going around the place. And because we have a sort of like rainbow theme, tying everything together. We have like a smorgasbord of colours. I was like, let's use that as a motif that sort of ties everything together. And I think it ends up, working reasonably well. Here you can see I basically put a bounce light underneath everyone of their own respective like image colours. In previous ones I do like an ambient glow around them, but I didn't really like how that looked in this one, so here I am just putting more foreground in. I tried to put more background in, it looked really distracting, and I was just like, let's not bother, let's just keep these lights in. You can see I tried veils, I tried like hanging beads, I tried more lasers, and I'm just like, none of that works. Keep it simple, it's already so busy. So the final things I do is I use a gradient map with a rainbow to put everything on top, and then this is me just doing the meta stuff or thumbnail art, so I'll just sort of pause it so you can see the final thumbnail art itself. But yes, the final things I basically do is I use a gradient map to try and sort of bring all the colours closer together, but the gradient map I used was a rainbow, so it doesn't really bring them closer together, it just means that similar values are changed into being like in the similar colour class essentially, which I often use a gradient map to try and sort of unify a colour palette together, because that's, kind of what I use it for. But because there's so many different colour palettes I'm using here in the first place, it doesn't really make sense for me to fix it in one colour palette. So I experimented with using a rainbow. I actually kind of like how it looked. And then the very final thing I wanted to do is basically add some sparkles to everything, because I was like, it doesn't look quite right. I think it looks a bit too empty, and I wanted to maybe put something in that empty space above, but I was like, it's really difficult because it's going to be so blocked off. So then I was like, well, we got crystals shine, let's just put some sparkles in some of these empty spaces, and I think that combined with like these very thin lasers which go across help give a sort of like sense of depth, because everything is given the same sort of perspective, everyone's roughly the same size, even though it doesn't quite make sense, but these lasers which go across help give a sort of sense of depth, because you see, oh, a laser passes across Audie and Phoebe, but it goes behind like Amelia and Apollo. Okay, so that means that laser goes between them, it sort of brings them forward. So there we go, there's the final Animal Crossing thumbnail art. Fashion themed, took a whole year for me to do, not really, but it did take about 40 hours I think of me drawing. The actual time lapse itself is about 25 hours, but so much of it was about conception and like exploring and like collating sort of like reference images together. It was honestly extremely exhausting. Is it perfect? No, but I do like it a lot, to be honest, and it might be my favourite Animal Crossing thumbnail art. Honestly, it was a great experience because I also learned a lot from it, so I definitely do things again differently, if I had the option, but so be it. So there you go. Hopefully you can look forward now to Animal Crossing New Horizons Year 7 having an actual flashy thumbnail art rather than MS Paint placeholder. I will be going back to make a Year 6 thumbnail art, but it will be considerably smaller in scope. I don't think any of the future thumbnail arts are going to be this crazy anymore, because the fashion aesthetic is done, everyone's getting much more homogenized, outfits together, like uniforms, like airport, air host uniforms, stuff like that. So yeah, I think it was really fun. Like, again, I love fashion, so I loved being able to tie everything together, being able to sort of try and experiment with these sort of things, and it was a real challenge, but there was so much which had to go into this that I'm not surprised I ended up burning myself out or trying to do it. But what we have at the end is a very flashy, very bombastic, I think, thumbnail art piece with a lot of very fun different fashion ideas in it. Almost a shame that you can't see all the fashions like properly represented at the end. So I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you look forward to Year 7 thumbnail art of Animal Crossing. Feel free if you have any questions about the process or the designs or any choices, feel free to leave them down below. I will be responding and answering them to the best of my ability, but otherwise, enjoy the ride. Here's to another year of Animal Crossing. So, I don't know if our usual round off makes sense, but if you have been watching, thank you very much. There's been, I don't know, artist commentary over a thumbnail art, and I've been Dear Darling, likes, comments, subscriptions, shares, all greatly appreciated. My socials are down below. Hope we see each other again, but for now it's our farewell, so until next time, bye bye for now.